This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
When I claw into the back of my skull and pluck forth the disjointed images and fragmented sounds to create the piecemeal sculpture we call memory, how much of the fuzzy picture can I point to with clarity? Can we call it truth? This fabrication, this constant recreation, how often is the film misremembered, a sporting event, something we can verify, Flintstones or Flintstones? It often requires a third party just to be sure. Just to be sure? And with knowing how easily we fabricate our own memories, what can be said of someone else's? Their lives? Their truth? Is there an obligation to remember correctly? To refrain from embellishment? Is there justification to sensationalize? How should we deal with the memories of the dead? My name is Rob Basercha, and joining me are my co-hosts, David B. Jacobs and Devin Shepard, and we are Cadaver Dogs. How's it going today, guys?
I'm stoked to do this episode. I feel like I say that every single time, but I'm actually excited for this one.
Are you usually not super excited for the other ones?
Oh, fuck, you called me out. No. Yes, no, of course I'm excited.
It was like, oh, we have to do an episode on the Thing movies.
Yeah, you're not alone. I actually dread this every week.
What? No, today we're doing paranormal and true crime, and I am like here for it. That's my shit. Obviously, I'm the one that brought these movies to you guys, so I'm stoked.
It's true. Last night I slept with a pillowcase on my head with the eyes cut out. Anyway, again, I'm Rob Basercha, and I'm a grip for Local 52, as well as the owner and runner of Whimsy Productions, LLC. Joining me is Devin Shepard. And what do you do, Devin?
I'm Devin Shepard. I'm a producer, writer, and director of mainly genre movies. Most recently, I produced the feature film A Nightmare Wakes, which is available on Shudder. Woo! I also produced the short film Attention, which is now on Bloody Bites with Bloody Disgusting World of Death. And yeah, I think that's all that I'm plugging today, but some pretty exciting new stuff there.
And I'm David B. Jacobs. I'm a writer, director, script supervisor, and horror addict. If you missed the Crimson Screen Horror Film Festival, where One Last Call, a short film that I directed and Devin wrote, screened, then you can still catch it on YouTube on Blind Raven Productions' YouTube channel.
Very cool. And please follow us on all social media accounts, Cadaver Dogs Pod. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, leave us a review on Podbean when you get the chance. So today, we have some really interesting movies crossing the barriers of paranormal and true crime. What is real? What is fake? And are people happy about it? And presenting our first film is Devin.
All right, our first movie is from basically our backyards, The Amityville Horror from 1979. Newlyweds George and Kathy Lutz get a killer deal on their dream home in Amityville, New York. The catch? It was the site of a grisly murder. A man shot and killed his entire family while they slept in their beds. It really was a great deal, though. And so George and Kathy begin to build their new life in Amityville along with Kathy's children from a previous marriage, one of which befriends an imaginary girl named Jody. Spooky stuff begins to happen, and George starts to not do so well, and we begin to question, could their house actually be haunted by the spirit of the murderer, or is something more sinister lurking within their home?
That's a good plug. I wonder, did you guys like this movie?
Yeah, dude, I loved this movie. I've seen this movie a few times, and I've watched the remake. I can't remember if I've seen the sequels or not. And I was always like, yeah, whatever. It's another fucking 70s paranormal movie, blah, blah, blah. And then I started noticing more stuff in it that's so subtle and so nuanced and so unique. And I'm so stoked to talk about everything that I discovered about it today. And it made me love the movie so much more.
And how about you, David?
It's okay.
What?
It's okay.
I actually like this movie. I don't know. It took a while to grow on me, but by the end, I was like really into it. And then till the end, and then I was a little disappointed.
All right. So I think I want to start off because I brought this movie to you guys because I am a sucker for paranormal. I said that earlier. And then it has true crime. And there's like all this conspiracy theories around this movie and around the true story. And I'm like so stoked to like dive into it. And then I'm happy that you guys just went on like a fucking research frenzy. So, I mean, a big thing that I want to talk about today is like the true story that inspired this film and kind of what has spiraled since then. And how this became pretty much just like a staple of America.
Wow. So I'm going to give a rundown on what happened before the events of the film, which was there was a house in Amityville, Long Island, which honestly, I just found out this happened in Long Island, which is like down the road from me. I had no idea. I think I've walked past the house before and didn't even notice. They've actually changed the name of the street now because so many people showed up.
No, it's still Ocean Avenue, but if you look it up on Google, they actually blurred out the house. So if you look up this address, and I don't think we should tell them the address because they're very much like against people knowing. It's online. You can find it.
You're right.
But yeah, the image is blurred, so you can't tell that it's the Amityville house. But regardless, I made David take me there anyway.
Oh yeah, and if you follow us on our Instagram, then you'll find that picture, and maybe there's even a ghost in the background.
Mm.
Yeah, that's me ghosting you guys instead of showing up. Yeah, because I was totally invited. So what's his name? All right, Ronnie DeFeo was 20 years old, and he was a known drug addict and a drug experimenter who had struggled with his father. And one night, while his whole family of 6, he was the 7, so his family is 7, he shot them all dead with a shotgun and then went to a bar and started telling people about it. And to make the story spookier, while he gunned down his family, no one actually woke up. They show this in the movie. They show Ralph DeFeo shooting his family
Allegedly.
dead. And so anyway, he instantly gets arrested because he basically confesses to it. And he was the one who called the police, strange enough. So, while he's in prison awaiting trial, a newly wedded family, George and Kathy Lutz, Kathy had 3 kids prior to the marriage, move into this new house because they got it for under market value. And then strange things start happening. The daughter starts seeing, in the movie, she sees an imaginary friend. Mm-hmm. But in the reality, supposedly she saw like a flying wolf-headed pig.
And flies show up. They hear whispers. It gets cold in the house. I think a lot of the typical paranormal haunting shit.
So one of the iconic images of this movie is the facade of the house, which looks like it has 2 big eyes and a really angry nose chimney, which is actually not the house. It was shot in New Jersey, so they built a superstructure and plastered it on top of the house. Apparently, the director really liked the way the superstructure looked because every other scene of the movie starts with an establishing shot of the house, which is one of my personal pet peeves because it adds nothing. Establishing shots are meant to establish a setting, but if you break a scene to go back to the same setting, there's no reason to establish anything, except the house's angry-looking eyes. I would love to do a rendition of this movie where it was like my middle school music teacher and had drawn on eyebrows. In every scene, the eyebrows progressively got angrier or more confused, depending on the tone of the coming scene. That way the establishment actually does something.
No, I think, okay, so, and I think this is a deliberate point made by the filmmaker, and I think a perfect way to start our conversation here. So, before the film was made, there was a book. And this book was very, very popular. And the book was all about the Lutz's paranormal experiences in the home. And so the book is the whole reason that the film is made, obviously. And so the very, very first image of the film, which is the establishing shot of those 2 windows lit in red, that was actually the cover of the book. And it was very, very much, this is the symbol of demonism and Satanism and everything bad in America. And so I think the filmmakers deliberately put it constantly throughout the film in order to show that, right? In order to like say, hey, this is the symbol, like forever you will remember this movie, forever you will remember this house. And we do to this day. It's like, what, 40 years ago now. And everyone can say, I know what the Amityville house looks like.
I actually like the establishing shots quite a bit.
I don't like constant redundant. I don't like redundancy in movies. There should be no redundancy unless it's like purposeful.
What I think that it does, though, is it does create this fame around the film, much like the film is creating this fame around the book, much like the book is creating this fame around these people, these supposedly normal Americans. And I think we can get a little bit into the conspiracy here. They were, not necessarily wealthy. The house was cheap because 6 fucking people died there. And the movie talks about this a lot. They're representatives of basically the working class, right? At one point, George Lutz in the movie mentions, the government will nickel and dime you if the house is too drafty, heating's going to go up. We constantly see their money struggles throughout the film, and they're supposed to be the representations of like everyday America. In real life, the Lutzes were struggling just the same. And then these paranormal experiences happened, and they made a lot of money talking about it on TV shows with the Warrens, making this book, making several films afterwards, after the first initial one, and like got a lot of recognition and didn't have money problems anymore.
Well, I had actually read that their money problems weren't as substantial as they're made out to be in the movie.
I've heard contradicting accounts on that as well.
Yeah.
I've heard they had to leave the house because they couldn't pay their mortgage. And I've heard that leaving the house, they still have the mortgage regardless, and that doesn't help them at all.
Yeah, I don't think within a month you'd be kicked out of the house and miss the first mortgage payment. Would that happen?
No, it would have been a scheme that they came up with regardless. Like they realized, like, oh, we're not gonna be able to afford this. We've got to leave.
Right.
But if the house was also just haunted, so like when there's a house haunted, you've got to get out of that thing.
Right.
There's a scary voice telling you to get out. It's the gateway to hell. There's a big pig monster that's running around.
Yeah, you can't have pig monster in the house. Their lawyer also said that they came up with a scheme over bottles of wine.
Yes, he did.
He did say that.
Yeah, I definitely have theories, and I want to talk about them more because I think there's like a little more to dive into there, a little more scandal.
There's a lot.
And I think it's well done in the film, but I do want to say on the blue collar everyday American life that I was mentioning, this film originally didn't do well.
Really?
Yeah, apparently that's what I read. I don't know.
How is that? Okay.
I mean, they saw money at the beginning. They don't care about the fucking back end, so. But Stephen King saw it and then was like, oh, this is, Stephen King, blue collar horror guy, was like, this is a perfect representation of what it feels like to be a homeowner or a person trying to make it in America. And David actually pointed out there are a lot of similarities from this film into The Shining, which came out a year later.
There are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, he's got his axe. He's running after. He's getting all possessed. He's running after his wife with an axe. He knocks down a door at some point, and I want him to shout, "Here's Johnny!" The little girl and Jody is like, "Oh, Jody wants me to play with her forever and ever and ever." And both of them are just a metaphor for domestic abuse. So there's that too. George Lutz is he's verbally abusive with pretty much everyone, not just his wife, but like his friends and whatnot. He hits his wife.
Mm-hmm.
He hits his friend,
he's very
too.
much like, I am going to be running this house. This is my house. He's like terrible, but he's possessed according to the movie, so that's how they justify it.
Yeah. He does redeem himself at the end of the movie.
Yes, because he saves the dog.
He saves the dog. Yeah.
That's what it was a little frustrating. Yeah, I think this whole movie is about an abuser and his family, and it's shown from his point of view, and like David said, we're supposed to forgive him. We're supposed to like say it's okay because he's possessed. Yeah, and that really bothered me. But there are so many little things throughout the movie that really said, he is abusing his wife. I mean, the very first scene where they're alone together after they've moved in, she's doing her ballet, and her shirt's open, and we're like, oh fuck, Margot Kidder is like fucking hot, and he literally just walks in the room and she gets scared, and nothing scary has happened yet to this point, and we're like, that's kind of weird. That's kind of showing that like maybe I mean, she's definitely startled by him, but like that kind of shows that maybe she's a little bit scared of George.
Maybe. I just figured it was like new environment kind of.
I'm in a new place.
They also just got married. It seems like, I mean, they don't reference, I suppose, how long George and Kathy have been together, but there's definitely this feeling throughout of it that George is an outsider to this family. And he's imposing himself on them. He's saying, no, this is my family, but the kids don't seem to like him. Jody doesn't like George, is what the little girl says at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, they're even just referring to him by his first name. It's really weird. It feels like he's not really their father.
In fact, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the kids actually in real life called George Mr. Lutz for a good portion of their lives.
He insisted on them taking his last name.
Yeah.
And adopting them, yeah. So they actually took his last name. So while we're on this, there was a newer film that came out called My Amityville Horror. The oldest son talked about the abuse that he suffered from George, but he was still insistent on the paranormal activity, which is pretty interesting.
So if anyone can watch the documentary, I highly recommend it. It's a sad, beautiful portrayal of a haunted character. Danny Lutz, who's the stepson of George and the son of Kathy. He mentions the abuse, and it's the first time that anyone actually said it out loud, but he also still very much believes that he was haunted and these paranormal things happened. And I think you were on the track here, Rob. It's this tragic story of his parents possibly made up this lie in order to hide the fact that their marriage was unhappy, or in order for, the mom to protect her children from her abusive husband who, as Danny put it, hit the kids. And Danny, in order to protect himself, has to believe this lie, has to believe in the paranormal in order to survive. It's a survival tactic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a sad, tragic story where America's feeding into this. America's feeding into this whole idea of the paranormal and really, really putting the Lutzes on a pedestal and want to hear more and more and more and more stories. And all the while, what probably did happen, and this is all hearsay, but what probably was happening was that George, was an abusive father, and we're feeding into the story, and it just keeps happening, and we're not actually putting a light on the real issues. Instead, we're giving them fame and giving them money to keep living on in this horrible situation that they're in.
It's surprising to me that they were able to even portray the abuse in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm watching him, seeing him being abusive, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's a metaphor for domestic abuse, obviously. Then I'm like, oh, was he actually abusive? And then I'm talking to Devin about it, and she's like, no, yeah, that there's a lot of evidence to support this. The kid has corroborated that, yes, he was abusive. This is not just something they did for dramatic effect. It's like, well, now this whole story is a lot more fucked up.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. It's definitely a severe storyline. So, do you guys think the story is true?
No.
Devin?
Oh, you mean you think the Lutzes are lying?
Yeah, do you think it's made up?
I 1000% believe the Lutzes are lying.
Yeah. I don't think there's a chance. But
if so, this is the greatest American hoax ever, and for that, I mad respect. Well, the greatest American hoax besides the Warrens, but that's a different story for a different time. But they're also a part of the story. So all in all, this whole entire thing, greatest American hoax, period.
Yeah, the Warrens showed up. They covered that in Conjuring shit. It's oh yeah, there are totally spirits in the house. Ooh, whatever. First off, I'm sorry. Ghosts aren't real. Supernatural isn't real.
Oh, no.
I'm Jewish. Hell isn't real. Yeah, they're so clearly lying. They contradict themselves constantly. Even the lawyer who they came up with the idea with, he tried to only give them 12% cut. So they said, nah, fuck you, and they went and got a different guy to write the book. But then that lawyer went and got his own guy, and they still wrote little articles that caused all the lawsuits. If you read those articles, it's like saying different things. All the details are different. There are no voices telling the priest get out. The priest is still there, but that's it. The details of it are different. There's a part in that one where Kathy Lutz suddenly becomes an old woman for a minute.
That happens in the movie, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah, that happens at the end of the movie. After when he's knocking down the door with the axe. Yeah.
Okay, maybe that part was in the Lutz's version, then I don't know. A lot of stuff happens, and it doesn't even have an internal logic to it. It's what's causing this? Is it a pathway to hell? Is there a ghost? Like, what is the source of what's happening? What is its motivation? What are the rules of it? Like, they don't have a clear through line. And I think that's also what really holds me back from enjoying the movie more, because there's too much things and there's not one thing. They don't have a specific source, and it's very frustrating.
That doesn't bother me, because since it's a throughway to hell, it's supposed to be like spirits passing back and forth, causing all this trouble.
But it's more than that.
Well, yeah, and the spirits also possess you and blah, blah. But, I mean, I don't really mind that the logical rules break down when you're faced with a gateway to hell. I kind of appreciate that. But I do think the movie has a really good crescendo until its abrupt ending, which is a pretty big letdown.
A Lutz down.
It's a Lutz down.
So the Amityville Horror, I think, started this craze of paranormal invasion films and showing how they can disrupt the so-called perfect American family, right? I mean, that's what Poltergeist was all about. That's what so many movies in the 80s was about. And this was like really the start of it. 1979 cusp, baby. We're about to destroy some America. And I think, and I really want to get into this when we get into our next film, but we have to remember this is also just like coming out of the Vietnam War. And even in the movie, they mentioned George Lutz, was a veteran, did go to the war, comes home, and weirdly is coping not so great, and through abuse and through depression, and is not doing well, not supported financially due to his service. So I think it's saying a lot more there than we realize about America.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because it does seem like it's the breakdown of the perfect American family, but when you really look at them, I don't want to say they're not the perfect American family. Like, a family doesn't have to be one thing, but they're not the then contemporary idea of what a family should be. That the father, he's not the biological father of the children. They're newlyweds, but she has a 10-year-old son already. She has 3 kids. They don't have any money, but they're still in a house that is bigger than they can afford. It's like they're chasing the American dream. They're chasing this perfect ideal, but it's almost toxic for them. It's hurting them more than it's helping. She thinks she needs to have I'm not saying the real Kathy Lutz, I'm saying the one in the movie. She feels she needs to have the husband who can father her children, so she marries this fucking asshole. We've got to have this big, beautiful house, even though we can't afford it. Oh, fuck, it's haunted.
Yeah, actually, that's so interesting what you said. Like, she needs to marry this guy who can father her children. There is a little bit of toxic masculinity in here. That's definitely very present in this film.
Yeah, there's a lot of like male bravado, which is interesting. So we were talking about whether or not this movie's real, and the actors in the movie agreed with us. James Brolin and Margot Robbie went on record and said they really don't believe the story.
Margot Robbie.
Margot Kidder.
Did I say Margot Robbie
Lois
earlier?
Lane,
I
not
said
Harley
Margot.
Quinn.
Lois Lane, yeah, Margot Kidder. Said that it's interesting for different reasons, actually. Margot Kidder just straight up didn't believe it, and she actually said that she probably should have tried to believe it, and her acting would have been better, which I thought her acting was very good in the movie. James Brolin was also very good, but he said that speaking to George, he realized that George was too good of a speaker and too charismatic to believe him, which I found really interesting. And I think that actors in particular are in a unique position to sniff out sophists and con artists, as their job is basically to fake things.
And to like over observe.
Yeah, right. Like they should react to things truthfully in the moment or whatever.
I want to go to our next film, but first, here is a promo for another podcast on the Paranormality Network.
Hey guys, it's Heather and Kristen, the hosts of Sinister Sweethearts podcast, and we want to take a little bit of time to tell you about our show.
We're former college suitemates turned lifelong best friends who share a love for all things weird, creepy, and sinister.
Come along with us as we journey through the 50 states of America, exploring everything from the paranormal to conspiracy theories to true crime and everything in between.
It's a wild ride with a new state chosen every week, and you never know what you're going to get. New episodes drop every Tuesday, so come find us at sinistersweethearts.com or your favorite podcast player, and let's explore our sinister sides together.
Coming back to our podcast, let's talk about the first slasher film to feature a man wearing a pillowcase.
Between February and May of 1946, in the cities of Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas, 5 people were murdered and 3 wounded by a man known only as the Phantom Killer. In 1976, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, written and directed by Charles B. Pierce, was released based on this true story. Only the names have been changed, and also a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, a whole lot of stuff. A whole lot of stuff. And a trombone. Again, what do you guys think? Do you like this movie? I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't really like this movie.
I question if it's a slasher movie. It is usually described as slasher and definitely has a lot of elements in common with slasher.
Yeah, okay. Going off of that, I think a lot of this film is actually inspired by, excuse me for pronouncing this. David and I went into a very long discussion about this. Giallo,
I think.
Horror fans are literally strangling our necks right now. I'm sorry. I don't speak Italian. Please just tell me how to fuck and pronounce this word. Like, leave us a comment and tell me how to pronounce it, please. But yes. So I think it's inspired by the Giallo films, because right before this was when they were becoming really famous in America, which then continued to inspire Psycho and Peeping Tom and led to these procedural true crime stuff, which led to slasher. So I feel like around this time, which is 1976, we're starting to see that real spark of slasher, because Halloween comes out a year later, 2 years later.
2 years later. This was after Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right, Texas Chainsaw. That was the one I keep missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So around this time, I felt like slashers are pretty big, and this one was unique in the way that it was more based around the story of the cops and the solving of the case.
Speaking of, there's very little interesting police work done in this movie. And there's a lot of problems with this. All right. The first half of the movie is like basically all filler. There's a lot of nonsense.
Well, the comedic relief is
so
filler.
much filler, dude. There's a whole musical number during prom that has nothing to do with this story. There's a whole 2-minute scene of a woman spiking punch just to smile about it. It's a bunch of police jargon that doesn't do anything. Also, the sound quality in this movie is awful.
That's true.
The sound quality is awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's God.
In some ways, it almost adds to a sense of charm that it feels very amateurish, and that it almost adds to the documentary style of it, that they can't even afford good sound. Okay.
They also hold shots too long. When women are screaming, they just scream forever. I'm just crapping on this movie. I just don't like it.
It did bother me, and it felt a lot like on women violence. And I think I'm with you, Rob. There were so many. All of that moves so quickly. It's just random scene, random scene, random scene, random scene, and now we're gonna sit in this killing scene for 10 minutes and stare at this woman as she dies. And then we're going to show her dead body for another long time. And then we're going to show her getting stabbed with a trombone for a good 5 minutes.
All the stuff that you guys complained about, I like.
Of course.
I think I think the movie works very well when it is leaning into its documentary style and during all the kill scenes, because they are so freaking disturbing. I think that the kill scenes are actually effective, that it's not like of Friday the 13th where you're like, yeah, Jason, go kill them. You're like, these are real people. This is really messed up. I don't know if that's moral. I don't know if it's right, but it is effective, and I will give it that part. I will give it that much. I have my qualms about whether or not it's respectful, because it's really disrespectful. I have that problem with it.
Oh, the filmmaker was fucking so disrespectful.
Yeah, incredible.
Okay, can we talk about what the fuck happened? So, in the 40s, this Texarkana was fucking terrified of this killer. And then 30 years later, this director, Charles B. Pierce, who grew up in Texarkana, lived in Texarkana, decided, I'm going to make a movie about the scariest, most terrible thing that has ever happened to this entire town. I'm going to shoot it in the town. I'm going to use people whose parents probably suffered, at the hands of this mass murderer. serial killer. And then I'm going to premiere it in this town. And this is like going to be the only thing this town is known for is for this fucking movie about a serial killer. Come on, David, you were talking about immoral. That's like all kinds of fucked up immoral.
Yeah. And in the poster of the movie, it says, in 1946, this man killed 5 people. Today, he still lurks the streets of Texarkana, Arkansas. So the officials of Texarkana decided they were going to sue him over that. Because they're like, yo, dude, you're telling people the killer's still out there. You're just trying to stir up panic with this. And
which happened.
Yeah.
People actually believed that, hey, this killer's still in fucking Texarkana. Because they never, officially caught him. Oh, yeah.
The movie doesn't talk about the fact that they probably did catch him.
Right.
What do you mean they probably caught him? So at the end of the movie, there's like a showdown between the killer and the cops, which is really weird. The killer's just like walking around in broad daylight in his mask. For some reason, he's wearing the mask. And they're chasing him. And then he gets shot with a shotgun in the leg, and then he runs away, and he runs into the swamp.
Great
So you're
scene.
like, all right, well, did he die? Yeah, that's the best part of the movie by far. And you're led to believe that he either went to the swamp and died, or he got away. So, David, what really happened?
Cool. So that whole swamp thing, complete fiction. Never happened. Really, they found there was a guy named Yule Swinney, who I don't even think he actually lives in Texarkana. I think he lived nearby. But he was a car thief, and an officer started to connect that all these cars are getting stolen around the same time of the killing. And then Yule's wife, Peggy, literally married the same day. She gets arrested, she comes in, and she starts telling them, like, oh yeah, Yule did all these killings. He did this. I was there for this one. She starts pointing to evidence that she shouldn't know, that is not public knowledge. So, she, brought them to the exact spot where one of the killings happened. And they're like, oh, okay. So this Yule Swinney guy, he's probably the Phantom Killer is what you're telling us. And she goes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And they're like, okay, well, will you testify that in court? And she goes, no. And she's his wife. They just got married, so you can't make her.
Wait, so she literally got married on the day that she went to the fucking cops?
I think so. I just read this today. I might be getting some of these details wrong. Do your own research. Yeah, something like that.
Conspiracy.
Weird.
Yeah. And then they arrested him for car theft. He had a history of car theft. So they were able to call it habitual and give him a larger sentence because of that. There are some questions about whether this is moral. It was legal, but there are definitely ethical questions that are brought up about it. He was released from jail before the movie, to be fair. So he was free at the time. And then he died in the 90s. So it's not
the poster's not wrong.
He was never charged with being the Phantom Killer. And they weren't able to further investigate. At some point, they're just like, he's in jail. What's the point? But, the cops who worked on the case continued to swear for the rest of their lives, like, yeah, that guy's the Phantom Killer. And the movie's just pretending he was never caught. And just leaves out this entire thing.
Again, caused all this mania around this town being like, hey, there might be a murderer still in the streets here. We don't know. Much like, Amityville, I doubt anyone knows that town for anything other than the house,
And by the way, Amityville's a really diverse town, which they do not tell you in the movie. It is divided. The movie is set southern side of Amityville, which is wealthier, but it's really heavily segregated. Long Island has some messed up stuff with its segregation.
Super fucked.
But yeah, you go 1 block north of the Amityville house, and it's like an extremely diverse neighborhood, and it's just all white people in the entire movie. And Texarkana too. Texarkana's, I've never been there, but according to the internet, it is a very diverse town. And the main guy in the movie, the one who Ben Johnson plays, Ben Johnson gives a great performance, but he was super miscast because that guy's Hispanic.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's fucking partially in Texas. Yeah, and I think, David, you made a point when we were texting about this earlier. It's something different with the whitewashing in this film, and the fact that it then makes this movie about, or both of these movies rather, about invading the so-called, like I was saying earlier, perfect American family. Like, yeah, I'd probably phrase that so wrong.
No, I know exactly what you mean. That you didn't phrase it that poorly.
Devin, you have a really good point in that what's interesting about these movies being whitewashed is not only the time period in which they're whitewashed, but that the films themselves pit the core family unit, which is representative of American family values, against an outsider presence that is trying to invade them. So if we were going to put a kind of diversity within this film, given the time period and the context of an American family, it would possibly dilute the meaning of this.
Yeah, because in reality, the true events of these were not about outsiders breaking in. The Phantom Killer was just a guy who lived around there. Amityville, the DeFeo kid was literally the son of the family, and has alleged that his parents abused him. In this case, I definitely say alleged because that guy is not reliable at all.
Right. And George Lutz is a stepfather of his family. I think you're so right in that, like, they wanted to show that the horror is coming from inside the house. And if they were to, at this time, I'm sure their ideas are like, if we're diversifying, then people aren't going to relate because only moviegoers are white.
Yeah.
Sorry.
White Catholics.
I said yeah. I said yeah at like the bad time because it sounded like I was agreeing. Like, yeah, people goes only white. No. We've learned that that's not the case right now. That's changing a lot.
Finally, it just took 50 fucking years.
Yeah. Well, diversity.
They're fear-mongering for a very specific audience and just ignoring the majority of America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And off of that, David, one of the things I did really enjoy about The Town That Dreaded Sundown was that the killer is very, very human. Every single kill that we see him do, he fucks up. He just like trips. He like breaks things the wrong way. He's not superhuman.
I like how he breathes.
Yes.
In all the later slasher
thing.
movies, you always see like they seem completely still or whatever. But when he's there, he's like, you can see him breathing and his mask is pulling in and pushing out. And it's like so frantic and like he's out of breath all the time.
Yeah.
So I did want to talk about this one thing. I'm just going to totally derail us now. I had mentioned earlier that in the Amityville film, George Lutz was a vet. They talk about the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War ended in 1975. Which primes us for, the characters in Amityville to be vets. But also, in The Town That Dreaded Sundown, it was made in 1979. So again, dealing with Vietnam vets, but took place in 1946, which is right after World War II ended. And so I think there's this relationship here between the era that it chose to redo, which is 1946, versus the era that it's in, that they show a correlation of men coming home, which they mention in the movie The Town That Dreaded Sundown. They mention, this guy who later on gets murdered just came home from the war. And it explores this idea of America thinks they just saw all the horrors overseas. They think that, like, everything bad is happening anywhere else but America, and America's great, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, there's still horror at home. And I think this goes a little bit into what we were saying about, like, the horrors coming from inside the house. These movies are about the insiders, not the outsiders. There's still more to fear than the other. It's America that we should fear. It's all this like anti-war propaganda almost.
Yeah.
It is really interesting.
That's interesting.
Well, it's interesting to think of them in terms of like PTSD. George might be abusive because of his time in Vietnam, not necessarily, but a lot of that anger and frustration or delusion or whatever might be a response to that, as well as the killer in The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I mean, this is a major stretch, but if they happen to be coming from World War II, which had just happened,
right,
and bring that bloodlust to the nation, it is kind of like a town which seems like it could finally get this breath of fresh air following this terrible international incident, has to deal with the domestic incident.
Right. So it kind of says like the horrors are not over. And I think I'm saying anti-war in the sense of like, there's more than just war on foreign soil. There's war on our own soil that we need to fight these battles first before we can go anywhere else. But also Amityville, saying a lot of what you were saying, Rob, like about PTSD, and like I was saying earlier with like, with people having trouble staying afloat after a war, with all the economic turndown and stuff like that, showing more of like the reality of the repercussions of war. And showing us being like, we were all rah-rah America last year, but this year, maybe not so much.
Yeah. I mean, in Town, it's also because Town wants to propagate that the killer is still out there or whatever. It's also saying like the horror will never be over. There will always be some other battle to fight. We're never going to get to rest.
There will never be peace.
Like it is kind of the whole era of the late 70s after Vietnam. I've always found this interesting that it kind of, we had an era of horror movies that are about these killers that are stalking us, and anyone can be a killer. That's basically what the slasher movies were about as a whole. Halloween it's some maniac in this town is possessed by evil. A Nightmare on Elm Street, you have he's a pedophile child killer. It's all just these very local menaces, and I mean, maybe it's even from Nixon Watergate. I'm not even really certain where the exact source of that came from.
It's America starting to distrust the government. It's America starting to distrust their home. And I think a lot of it is coming from this hippie culture where we really start to say, hey, like, question what these people are telling you. Like, maybe it's okay to have sex. Maybe it's okay to like this kind of music. Maybe it's okay to like the devil. I mean, Anton LaVey was all throughout, I think he started in like 66 through the 70s. Like, it's this whole counterculture movement. And there's this one shot in Amityville, which I think says a lot to me. Okay, not one shot. There's two shots. When Kathy is doing the ballet scene, there's so much that happens in that scene. It's so perfect. But she puts a flower in her hair. You know, she's probably used to be a hippie. And then there's an exterior of her bedroom at one point, and you see an acoustic guitar hanging up on the wall, and you see these flowers, and you see all these like relics that were originally symbols of the hippie culture just like hung up. And you're like, oh, this is what happens when the counterculture grows up. This is us showing how to fight back against the establishment and against, like, as I say, rah-rah America as an adult.
That's neat. That's interesting. I gotta disagree with you because I think there's a lot of counterculture movies in the 70s, but these two movies are actually highly conservative. I mean, they prey on conservative fears, fears of Satanism, counter to religious aspects, and like fear of, you know, foreignness, which is we see the Eastern Dragon and the Devil's Room, and how we should stay away and just consolidate within the family structure, things like that. Maybe, and you know, the killer. Well, here, go ahead. I'm just going to continue.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Go ahead.
I was going to say maybe the fear then is about these counterculture hippies becoming the conservatives. And when I say like when they grow up, maybe it's them like saying, "Oh shit, maybe my parents were right about a few things."
Well,
I'm into that.
The last part of what you're saying, I think, is right. In that, like, these conservative horror films are supposed to get people who are engaged in counterculture to fear that counterculture and embrace conservatism, because the conservative people are always the heroes, you know, the priests and whatnot. And you know, the priest is blinded when he faces this otherness. You know, you got to stay away from that shit.
But they're punished for their conservatism.
No, they're not. No.
Yeah, because she has to get married to this guy. They've got to buy a really nice house. They're punished for their conservatism.
Well, it plays upon the conservative fear, you know, of like Satanism, and when you face that, you got to go away, right? But there's nothing fun about it. There's no appeal to this counterculture, right? And like it's very in line with what if your start a family doesn't quite work, you know? And they're also like a non-traditional family. I mean, he picks up he marries a woman who has 3 kids prior.
Yeah, they're super non-traditional.
Yeah, which is strange. And like his friends call that out.
Well, and Town as well, right? It's like, I love what you're saying is we don't actually see this counterculture at all. And in Town, it's the same way. It's like they parked. We don't really like get that experience of them parking, but we see the repercussions of that, which is them being slaughtered.
There are some changes also in Town compared to the reality that lean into that. Like the girl's murdered with the trombone, the Peggy Loomis and her boyfriend Roy. The real world versions of those are Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin. They were not a couple. They were just friends. Yeah. She was playing the saxophone not at prom, but at a veterans dinner, something like that. Completely different. And they just changed it in order to make these characters more fitting with the counterculture, more fitting with the trope of someone who would die in a slasher, which hadn't even been established yet, unless you think it was established by Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw, which is okay, maybe.
Yeah. But it is really interesting how similar it is to Friday the 13th in that it's all about premarital sex and punishment. You know, they go away to engage in sexual acts.
But then the Phantom also kills a married couple, or the husband, and tries to kill the wife.
Yeah, but that's when he messes up. Like he was doing what he was supposed to be doing in the film's logic, and he was getting away with it successfully. And it's when he attacked someone who didn't deserve to be punished that things went awry.
That she got away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Not that.
Interesting.
Within the film logic, it's about like a biblical kind of, punishment.
Of course, it should be mentioned. Again, a lot of this is real, and that's just what actually happened.
And the more he glorifies it, kind of. So this is a really good segue to, I think, one of the central points of this podcast is, which movie do you think did more justice to the source material?
And by the source material, do you mean reality or what the Lutzes claim to have happened?
Open to your interpretation. Like, is it the most respectful, etc.?
Neither of these do justice. Both of these are, oh my goodness. I mean, if the Lutzes lied, first of all, the Amityville is just like giving them a bigger and better platform to shout their lies upon and fuck up their children's lives and earn a bunch of money. And then, I mean, everything I said about Town, in the fact that, like, so much of Texarkana was angry at the fact this film was filmed there and showed such a horrible, horrible light on the town. And they're like, hey, these are my relatives that you're, like, showing murdered on screen. And by the way, you're not even showing them murdered, like, in the right way. You're not showing their characters the way that their lives are totally different. And you're showing them as completely different people.
I think it was the brother of Mary Jean Larry, who in the movie is Linda Mae Jenkins. She's one of the first ones who's actually killed. Her brother sued the movie and was like, hey, you're making my sister look like this
loose girl.
Yeah, loose jerk who dropped out of high school or whatever. And actually she, like, graduated when she was 16 because she's really smart and wasn't anything at all what you are describing in this movie. And you're making her look bad.
And every year, Grandmama has to go watch this movie at the drive-in in Texarkana and be like, well, that was my sister in this film, and I'm angry about it.
Well, I mean, I actually think Amityville Horror does really good justice to the source material because it's meant to sensationalize a probably fictitious event, and I think it is successful in that it's a pretty good movie, and I enjoyed watching it.
But is that okay?
Right, it's such an interesting question because, like, I think you were so right earlier to ask the question, Rob, of, like, do you believe this is even real?
Yeah, but that's not what, I would argue that's not what the source material is. The source material is the book, and it does the book justice because it sold well, and it became...
Have you read the book?
No, I haven't read the book. I'm not going to read the book. I didn't like the movie enough to read the book.
Forgetting whether it does justice to the book, do you think the book and movie are responsible? Do filmmakers have any ethical responsibility? Is this something we should even be thinking about, or is this like a ridiculous question like, David, shut up, this is a fun, silly movie that you're supposed to have fun with?
Well, I mean, the Amityville Horror, the Lutzes are con artists, if you ask me, but mostly in a harmless kind of sense. Well, not really. I mean, you could argue that they hurt their kids, forcing them to live a lie, but they also probably generated lots of money from it. So it's kind of a give and take. But did anyone outside of the family really suffer because of this lie? I would say no.
Arguably the people who live there now, although I guess they chose to. People like me and Devin keep driving by and taking pictures.
I'd rather take a haunted house over people showing up. But the Town That Dreaded Sundown, I mean, I don't think it really does justice to the source material because I just think it's a kind of bad movie. But I also think it's like... Like, honestly, if you're gonna sensationalize the death of somebody, at least do it well, you know. And
So do you think it's okay?
like, if you make a good piece of art, yeah.
If you talk to the brother,
No, I don't care about
About-
that. I mean, I do
What?
care about that, but I think no, not do it well as in do it ethically. I mean, create a good product, like make something good. And I think the movie's bad, so I think you didn't do them service.
Hold on, no, you're not answering the question.
I
though,
am
'cause
answering
said,
the question.
No, because I said, do you think it's ethical? And you just said, I don't care if it's ethical. I care if they do it well.
But I think
Do
if
you
they do
think
it
it's
well,
ethical?
then it's ethical. Yes.
what? No.
I think if they do it well, then it's ethical. But I think if you do it badly, then it's unethical. And I think
But
it's
the
difficult.
argument also being for the Amityville Horror though is that what if the making of this movie, which at the time was good, people liked this film.
I like Amityville Horror now.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's good.
But it
yeah.
fucked up. It continued to fuck up the Lutz's life. So, in that sense, it's both good but unethical.
Well, no. They
Did Ronnie
did that
DeFeo get a
knowingly.
cut? And does that affect anything? I saw something that Ronnie DeFeo might have gotten a cut. I'm not sure if that actually happened or if it was just discussed. But I think that it was that original lawyer again was like, if we're going to do this, then Ronnie DeFeo is the one who started the whole thing, and we've got to give him a cut of the profits.
Yes, he did.
And then does that affect anything? Is that even a problem? Like, he's a terrible person who murdered his family. Does that mean he shouldn't get a profit while he's in jail for the rest of his life?
This is a thing that's been brought up several times over the past year is like, can inmates be making money by selling their rights? And the point
Really?
is to not sensationalize and not to idolize these killers, right?
So very relevant to that was the recent. It was called Des. It was like an English. Did you guys see that Des? It's a mini series about a killer who killed 13 or 14 men.
No, please don't.
Yeah, and it would have been really good, except one of the tenets of the film was that we didn't want to sensationalize the killer. I'm like, I'm watching a fucking show about the killer. Like, that is so hypocritical. If you're going to make any kind of media about a killer, you're sensationalizing it. So embrace that and run with it. If you're going to hold back halfway, then stop edging me, you motherfucker. Stop it. I don't like being edged.
Okay, I understand Rob's argument now.
Is the Town That Dreaded Sundown more ethical then because they do not tell you the name of Yul Swinney who allegedly did it? And are we less ethical because we totally just... I gave all of the real names. You guys didn't. I did that.
Well, I would say, first off, he was never convicted, so we can't say
He was never
the killer.
convicted.
He was never convicted,
No.
so we can't say he was killer. It's completely allegations.
Yep.
And again, to my point, I think the movie was not very good. So I think in that way, it doesn't do them justice. It also doesn't do it correctly, right? So it doesn't document the killings correctly, and it's not good either. So on both accounts, and it didn't. Well, it hits the trifecta, and the third account is it didn't ask permission, right? So like, all right, you're gonna combine all three.
Yes.
Does it do it accurately? Does it ask permission? And does it do it well? If you ask me, doing it well, I think, is the most important. The other two are also
And I think
important.
that's not relevant.
Well,
I don't think
it's not
whether
a
it does it well
documentary.
is relevant at all.
If it's a documentary, then it has an obligation to truth. If it's a fictitious source based on the truth, then it has no obligation to the truth whatsoever. It's fiction.
But it claims to be true.
No, it doesn't. It's fiction. It claims to be
Yes, it
based
does.
upon. It's still
It
fiction.
says, this is a true story.
Yeah, but it's still fiction.
It doesn't even... I don't even think it says based upon. I think it just says this is a true story.
But it's not a documentary. It's a fiction movie. Same thing. Like, you could say these are true events, but it's like, it's a joke. It's a fiction movie. Everything in a movie's a lie. You're supposed to know that going in.
So, like, the example that would support your argument maybe would be Fargo, where they also have claimed that's the true story, and it's literally just a story they made up, and they've said that in interviews explicitly. But in that case, I think it's much more clear that this is a joke, and the movie is intended this way. Whereas in Town That Dreaded Sundown, it's like, no, they're totally saying this is real. They're totally playing into the sensationalization.
Mm-hmm.
They are marketing and profiting off of this murderer. Is that okay? Forget about whether it's good. Pretend it was the best movie ever. Is that okay?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
And
war
I'm not
movies...
taking a stance, by the way.
Hold up.
No.
I feel like I feel like people get talked into a corner here because we start putting faces on the names. But this kind of argument, I don't think, is guilty of slippery slope if we apply it to all war movies, because all war movies profit off war, and you're not going to say, oh no, they're all unethical doing them. But you could also write, like, look, like these are so bad. This is showing people how bad war is, right?
That's a fair point, actually.
No, I agree.
All right.
Yeah, but and then it's also interesting because, like, if we're talking about true crime, podcasting is like the number one place for true crime right now. We're literally talking about true crime on this podcast as well. So, David, it goes to your question also of, like, in our sense, if we're making this podcast, are we even being ethical? Yeah. So I think under the same circumstances, because Rob, I agree with you, any war movies profiting off of war, then every true crime podcast is profiting off of murder.
Yeah. Because, I mean, they're both profiting off of true crime. One crime's just way worse than the other, being war.
I guess one isn't considered a crime.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the bigger problem is, like, is it okay to spotlight families without asking them? And you're like, no, that's not okay. They should be compensated.
Yes.
Right? And were the families compensated?
Yes. But the whole point is that they got compensated, and that's what fucked it up too, right? It's like, should they even be compensated?
For Amityville, but what about the other one? Like, the Town That Dreaded Sundown. Like,
the Town That Dreaded Sundown. They did change the names, but, I mean, I don't think, like, you could just type... I mean, I don't know how it would have happened then. They did change all of the people's names, which I think is good and helpful.
Mm-hmm. Right, but that's an interesting
warned if you look this up.
Though, David, because the Lutzes, they don't change their name. And I think that's, like, point against the Lutzes. It's like, really? You don't want to protect your identity at all? Not even of your kids? That's the parents not looking out for their children. That's them being like, no. We want the fame. We're not changing our names for the movie. Put us up there. And put us up there with a Brolin. And put us up there with a Margot Kidder. Make us hot.
They were really hot. Both of them.
I want to end it on this note. If you haven't seen my Amityville Horror, please go watch that film. It is so... We talk about horror films so much, but, like, that, and we talked about so many, like, quote unquote true horror films here today, but that movie shows the real horror of a family and the repercussions of what was the media sensation of the Amityville Horror. So I highly suggest everyone to go watch that film. It's available on Amazon.
And tell us what you guys think, because I don't think we've come to a definitive answer. Do you guys think that filmmakers have any ethical obligation when they are portraying real events? Do you think it is okay to depict real murders? What do you think are the moral responsibilities of a filmmaker and of storytellers?
So, once again, we're going to end the episode on my favorite part of the show, which is the bone review section, where we review each film on a 1 to 4 bone rating with half bones in between. And to start this off, we're going to start with Dave B. Jacobs. How do you rate both these movies?
I'm going to give them both 2 bones, leaning toward a little bit less than that, but 2 bones is fine. I think they're both okay. They both do some interesting things. I think they both have a lot of problems. Amityville Horror is very much establishing a lot of the tropes of modern haunted house movies that I think had not really been done in haunted house movies before that, but in a modern context just feel repetitive and boring, and again, just not as well as they're done in later movies like The Shining or The Changeling or The Conjuring. Yeah, I'm sorry, The Conjuring is a better movie. And Town That Dreaded Sundown, I really like the docu-style. Even though I have those ethical questions about it, I do think the kill scenes are disturbing and interesting. But the comedic relief is completely terrible and horrendous and pulls me out of it every time. It's up there. It's even transphobic at points, which is just, it's not even funny humor at any point. I like the remake, reboot, sequel, meta, whatever that is better. Maybe we'll even cover that at some point if you guys like this one. Who knows?
Yeah, I think everything David just said, I'm pretty much in the same wavelength, except I didn't enjoy the kill scenes as much in Town, so I'm going to go down to 1.5 bones. on that one. And I really did enjoy watching Amityville this time around. It could be because I had one beer too many. I don't know. But it's going to get 3 bones from me.
Very interesting. I'm going to give the Town That Dreaded Sundown 1 bone. I really didn't really like this movie. Although I like the end, even though it's not historically correct. Or in a lot of ways ethically correct. And Amityville Horror, I'm going to say 2 bones. It's an okay movie. I do like it. But in a lot of ways, the actors carried the story. I just felt like the later half was quite good. The ending was a severe letdown, and the beginning was a little bit too slow for me. Well, all right, guys, that's going to be it for our episode on Amityville Horror and the Town That Dreaded Sundown, where we asked questions about the ethical obligation of filmmakers when in reference to historical events. Let us know your thoughts on our social media accounts. And until next time.
Get out! Get out!